Okay, so I haven't napped since the last time I made a video. Let's see if this works out. I got a request recently to make a arrowhead from Flake. Now, making arrowheads from flakes is a mixed bag. It's either the easiest thing you can do or the most difficult thing you can do. And the reason why it's difficult is because it's so thin to begin with. It's like knapping a slab, all right? And if you don't know, or if you don't know your own strength, or you're rushing it, you just end up snapping the whole thing and wasting your time. Or, you know, if all you need is a triangle out of it and you don't need to do too many thinning strikes, it's one of the easiest things to do. And it was done in the past as well. So it's authentic if you want to make arrowheads that look like Native American arrowheads. It is possible to use flakes and keep one side of the flake free of any flake scars, except for the original one, of course. So the easiest thing to do to make it easy on yourself, if it's curved like this, just take the curved part off first. And you can do that in a variety of ways. I usually use direct percussion, but it's safer to use pressure. But yeah, I use direct percussion because it saves time. Alright, so just go to town on the edges. Get rid of all that square stuff. Hope the lighting's okay. This is kind of weird lighting. Yeah, normally I use a domed pad for this, for working on thin material, and also as the workpiece gets real thin, I like using a domed pad. That way I don't bridge it with pressure on either side while I'm applying pressure in the middle. You know, if I have a bridge like this, it's nice to have a little gap underneath, right? But if you got it bridged, it's going to snap right in the middle. Okay, so I don't really care about having free passage of flakes. I don't care if they travel halfway or not when it's this thin. So I'll just go around the whole thing. I'm doing this mainly with pressure. I might do a couple indirect percussion strikes. On that bulb of percussion. I'm finding that, or I'm remembering, when I'm at a knapping or something, one of the biggest requests is for me to do a arrowhead on a flake. I remember the last time I tried to do it, it was toward the end of the day and I was pretty tired. So I kept breaking the workpiece in half. And I ended up not demonstrating it because I was breaking everything. So I think my audience was disappointed in that case. But yeah, making arrowheads on flakes is how a lot of beginners start, of course. They'll pick up free flakes at nap-ins, or they'll spall something down that's pretty small to begin with, you know, a small nodule or something, and they got a bunch of small flakes like this. And they just want to see, you know, how to make a quick arrowhead, or one sufficient for hunting, or whatever. They just can't seem to get it. They can't seem to figure out what they're doing wrong, because they'll either snap it or it'll end up really thick. or they won't be able to get nice flake patterns, or they don't know about platforms, or how much grinding to do, or whatever. It's really not a matter of strategy when you've got just a simple arrowhead and a simple flake. There's not much strategy involved. I try to keep it simple in my videos, not too much explanation. What I'm doing now is just zigzagging the edge so I can get rid of all that. I don't get rid of the strange edges. Because you can't do much, you can't be sending flakes with an edge like this in very far. They just stop right there at the ridge, basically. So you want to get rid of areas like that. I'm using a kind of a long stick. This is a medium size pressure flaker. I'm not using anything except my knees for pressure in my hand. It's not up against my belly or anything like that. It's just loose. And you can see when you try to run a pressure flake, it just doesn't go very far. You want to get rid of that area. Okay, so basically went all the way around, made a serpentine edge on it. Now I can start looking for areas that are thick to attack first. Of course, attack the thick portions on the ends first. And this is going to be my tip here. The way I determine what's the tip and the base is whatever area is narrow is my tip. Whatever it turns out to be. If it breaks during that process of, zigzagging and stuff on the edge, if it breaks and stuff, I don't pay attention to what's the tip and the base at first, so that if it breaks, it kind of tells me later. I just go with the flow. So for now, this is a tip. Now, if something snaps down here and this becomes more narrow, I'll just flip it over and say that's the tip. If I break something off here, like if I get a clean break all the way across here, for example, and this ends up being wider than this, I'll switch it so that this is the tip. I'll get back to that one in a minute. When you have a large flake like this, the only use I see for this in a present form, or in close to present form, is just a flake knife. All right, if I want to make arrowheads out of it, I won't use something this thin and this long. I'll break it in half, because it usually breaks in half anyway. I'm trying to be gentle with it. Let's see. So, can't really use that piece unless I want to use it as a scraper. This edge here is excellent for scraping, like this. So I can keep it as a tool, but I can make 2 arrowheads out of this. These are more manageable size pieces. And you can get better at breaking it. I just was doing it kind of at random. I've got lots of these big flakes. All right. Let's see. Yeah, if you're limited on material, you want to kind of be careful where you break it. You can make a notch on either side and try to break it between the notches, you know, hit it between and bridge it and all that. You might even get a glass cutter, although I've never tried the glass cutter on rock. You might try that, just score it and then snap it with either those glass nipping or glass cutting pliers, or, you know, hitting it, tapping it to break it after you've scored it. But I've never tried scoring it. I just never bothered with it. So what I'm going to do here, since the edge is already close to this side up here, I'm just going to bring it closer and I'm going to attack this little spot there. I'm going to flip it over and then I'm going to attack the other side. Just taking this edge down so that it's easier to run flakes across the top here. Still a little curved, right? So I'm going to take as much of this off as I can down the bottom here. Okay, so it means in contact with the pad, that's the flat part. I'll use the rounded part. I just attack the biggest lump first. I think you can see that. It's the same angle, same position, same everything if you're using pressure or indirect percussion. I think I might have ground that down a lot, right? More than I should have, and it made it difficult. So at first it was just slipping off. I moved over a little bit this way and pushed off, and it worked. Which means that I was a little bit off on my flake. It would have been better if I had pushed off in the original location, but I had to move it just to get that flake to come off without too much fuss. I was putting a lot of pressure. You really don't want to put a lot of pressure on the tip. Even with a domed pad, you can still snap it in the middle. Okay, so I'm going to attack the fattest part again from here. Go to the other side. Come at it from the other side. And again, it's the same angles with pressure and with indirect. I think some guys use different angles, but I tend to use the same. It just doesn't go as far or as wide with pressure as it does with an indirect percussion strike. With full power. I mean, if I was using a lot more pressure, maybe I can get a flake that looks like an indirect percussion flake. But I don't normally like to use that much pressure. I break more points with pressure than anything else. Now, if the edge is too thin, you're not going to have much success removing those thick spots. So make sure you have a good seat for your pressure flaker that doesn't crumble. Put some good pressure on it. It is going to move. It's hard to get these flakes to stay put. They move, they wobble. Okay, you just got to live with that and do a little bit of a exaggeration on the angle so that when it does pop off, you're at the correct angle. So you make it a little more drastic than you normally would, and then it's gonna wobble and move. But this is the right angle right there to snap it off. And one of the hardest things for new guys to get is, I think, the holding position. How do you hold it so that you can drive flakes when it's this small? I mean, I had a lot of trouble with that in the beginning. You just got to get used to putting pressure on with your very tip of your fingers, and then, you know, compensate for the wobble a little bit when you're using pressure. That way you don't get short flakes. Because if it wobbles or it moves and it goes like that, not hit, but press down, the flake will be short. So you have to exaggerate your attack and anticipate that movement. So the goal is to flatten one side first. In this case here, that's the easiest thing to do. This side's pretty flat. I'm going to do some pressure flaking on the base. Again, you got to be careful not to snap the whole thing. You don't want to be putting too much pressure on it. But it's nice to get long flakes. A step fracture may have been caused by the pad or just other things. It's probably the pad, but it could be just trying too hard to get a long flake, and it's just not traveling. Okay, so that's pretty flat. Okay, so I'm just knocking off the delicate areas and turning the edge to that side, or dropping it down, however you want to say it. At this stage, I could just do the outline that I need now, so I don't have to worry about it later. I could also make it more narrow to almost the dimensions that I want. Almost the final dimensions, because I really don't have to thin it. Okay, so that's the basic shape. Now I'm going to start driving some long flakes. Now I can do a lot better with percussion, indirect percussion on stuff like this. See that step area right here? I can put an indirect percussion flaker right there in that little depression, hit a flake off, and that flake will be wide enough to take out that area and come into this area, take off this lump right here. If I were to try to do that with pressure, it would probably send a narrow flake in here and not get that. And then I'll have to come over here and try to take it off with another pressure flake. It's possible, but I think I'm going to do it with indirect percussion. Yep, it was wide, but it didn't quite go wide enough. See that? It didn't quite get that. So I'll try from the other side. And I could do the same thing with pressure. That could have been a pressure flake too, with enough pressure. Well, it didn't fan out quite far enough to get that step fracture completely off, but it got close. Just removing some thick areas. This is kind of risky at this stage because it's already so thin. But I usually take risks with my knapping. A lot of times I just don't have patience to try to strike off the perfect flake. Okay, so I do have a mistake. I have a step fracture in there. I have edges that are a little bit too thin. You know, this, I took a little bit too much of a bite out of that. It's a little bit too thin in here. Well, we'll see. What I mean is it's thin right there, so I can't be pushing off flakes off of this area, but I can do it off of this area and that area. But if you are inexperienced and you get your edges too thin and you're still too wide, you won't be able to get a good seat for a pressure flake on a really thin edge like that. You know what I mean? If you have a really thin edge, or if you start getting really thin edges and you have junk in the middle and you're still wide, you're not going to reach them because you don't have a good enough platform or a thick enough edge. You're going to have to trim back this whole thing, and wherever you're going to attack, you got to trim it back to get a robust edge that's strong enough for you to have a good seat for your pressure flaker to remove flakes, to get rid of that junk in the middle. Now, if you don't have any junk in the middle, you're fine. But I have some junk in the middle here. These spots, that's a thick spot I want to get rid of. And, you know, here's a thick spot, and here's a thick spot. If my edges are too thin, I won't be able to run flakes into that area. Okay. Now I've noticed, I think more than 70% of my viewers that view my channel are first timers and not from recommendations or from subscribers. They're just searching for knapping videos and clicking on whatever comes up. So I get a lot of questions from new people. So I try to incorporate both perspectives, information that new people need, and then some information for you old-timers that have been watching my videos for a long time. One of the hardest things to do also is to shape and thin at the same time. You know, get the shape on the outside and then thin at the same time. But that's what the original knappers were doing in a lot of cases as they got better at their knapping and became more advanced in their skill. But that's much easier to do when you are working with the same shape every day, day after day, and all you're doing is one type of arrowhead. Modern knappers usually do several different types. But yeah, that goes for beginners too. They try many different styles. So it's hard to concentrate on the shape and the thinning at the same time if you're doing lots of different styles. So if you are new and you want to get good at just the knapping by itself, I would suggest just sticking with one type of point. Don't be trying to do many different types of points and then expect your brain to figure out how to thin and shape those different points on demand. You know what I mean? I've got an island going here, which is a pretty common thing. A little bit too much pressure right there, so it took off a lot of the edge. But I tried to blow the flake up through here, but it didn't release. Could have been the pad, or it could have been just lack of energy or some other issue. It could have been, you know, too much pressure from the pad holding that flake in so that it wouldn't pop out. So the next flake is going to be pretty critical. I'm going to do an indirect percussion strike. It gives me a lot more power to get in through there. I could do it with a pressure flake, but the indirect is more reliable, I think. More reliable. I'm just setting up the platform. I like a large platform. Just in case if the first strike doesn't work, I can move over to the next spot. Instead of having to do a separate platform for each strike, I just like to do a large one. See that this is almost a continuous platform. Okay. Seem to have dropped my mallet. I had to use my wood flaker handle. I can't seem to see where. I'll tell you what, I'll use the steel. I don't want to lose any power on this strike. Okay. There, that was pretty good. Okay, so I'll just continue. Here it is. I found the mallet. It had rolled away. Okay. Sometimes a lot of grinding is required, sometimes it isn't. You'll just need to go by feel on the type of stone you're using. And you can feel if it crushes, you need to grind more. If you end up crushing all of it and you just can't get any further, and you got all kinds of steps, you just need to take back, you know, nap down the edge again. Get rid of, or get as close as you can to all those crushings and all that mess, and then grind it again, abrade it again, so you'll be able to have a cleaner edge for pressure flaking. So right now I'm going to have to try to get this step fracture either from this side, come in that way, or this side and come in that way. I can't hit it directly in the middle because it'll step again. So I'll just continue this on the next video.